There is a moment that every watch collector eventually runs into. And it's not when you buy your first luxury piece. It's not even when you hit what you thought was your ideal watch collection. But it's the moment when you look down at your wrist, surrounded by watches that you once had to chase after, and you still have that feeling like something's missing. Not because you need another watch, but because you've really never defined what enough watches looks like. And the truth is, most collectors never do. So today we're not talking about specific models or specs or releases like we've been talking about watches and wonders the last couple of weeks, but instead we're talking about something that I think is far more important and honestly something that kind of dictates every decision you make as a collector, and that is the psychology of satisfaction. Because here's the reality. You can build a collection with an Omega, with a Rolex, with a Jaeger-LeCoultre. You can check every one of your boxes on paper, and you can still feel like your collection is somehow incomplete. So the goal of this episode is actually pretty simple. We want to talk about why that happens and help you understand, and more importantly, how to actually build a collection that you're satisfied with. Now, my name is James. I'm a watch collector, I'm a watch enthusiast, and I am a watch advisor. And I am all about you getting to know and love your watches. So if you enjoy this type of content, please do like the video. Subscribe to my channel because you'll see new videos every week. And check out the description for more of my content like this. Now, as we get started today, of course, we have to do our weekly wrist check. So today I am wearing my Girard-Perregaux 1966 Orion, beautiful aventurine dial, a dark, deep midnight blue alligator leather strap, and a very wearable case size. It's probably the watch in my collection that fits me the best, so I do really love it. So let's start with the most common pattern in watch collecting. You've all been here. You get a watch you've been thinking about for months, maybe even years in some cases. You finally pull the trigger. You get the watch in your hands, you unbox it, you feel the texture on the box, you wear it non-stop for a week once you get it on the wrist, and it feels awesome. But then, a few weeks go by, maybe a couple of months, maybe it's longer than that. Maybe you honeymoon, that's what we call it, honeymooning, right, for several months. But then that feeling starts to fade. You say, my gosh, what happened? The watch didn't change, but you adapted to having the watch. Now, this is something in psychology called hedonic adaptation. Not trying to use big words today, but we're talking about psychology. So this is the tendency for humans to return to kind of a baseline level of satisfaction, no matter how exciting the initial experience was. And in watch collecting in particular, this is dangerous because it creates a very specific illusion, and that is that the next watch will be the one that finally satisfies you, and then you'll be done. And you see this happen with a lot of brands. One brand I always like to mention here is Rolex, because you get one, you start thinking about the next reference, then another configuration, then a different complication, and before long, you have that goalpost that just keeps on moving. And it's not because your taste is evolving, but it's because your brain has gotten used to having what you already have. So the first shift that you need to make is this one. You've got to recognize that excitement and satisfaction are not the same thing. Excitement is temporary. Satisfaction is stable. And if you chase excitement, your collection will never feel complete to you no matter what you do. Now let's talk about something that's even more subtle, but arguably more damaging, and that is social comparison. And in the world of today, it is easier than ever to see what other collectors own. You can open Instagram, you can go on watch forums online, you can watch YouTube, watching something like this. My channel, right, can be a source of this. And suddenly, your perfectly good collection is sitting next to some sort of grand complication from Patek Philippe, some sort of fancy Audemars Piguet that's got gem setting or a flying tourbillon or whatever it is, and a high complication piece that you weren't even thinking about yesterday because you didn't even know it existed. And what happens? Once again, your baseline shifts. It's not because your collection got worse, but it's because that reference point changed again. And this is where a lot of collectors tend to get stuck. They think that dissatisfaction is actually coming from their watches, when the reality is it's coming from the constant exposure to more watches. So you're not lacking anything. You're just constantly being shown more and more and more. So your brain starts to interpret normal as something that is actually extremely rare to it. And this is where you have to be intentional, because if you don't define your own standards with this, the market will define them for you. How do you think we get hype? It's exactly what's happening around some of these models. Now let's talk about what you're actually collecting. This is where things start to get a little more personal, because most collectors never stop to ask a very simple question. And I take pride in the fact that a lot of what I do on this channel is dedicated to helping you try and answer this question. The question is, what am I actually collecting? What are you collecting? I'm not talking about brands. I'm not talking about specs or complications. I am talking about identity of the watches that you're actually looking at. So what are you collecting? There's versatility, there's craftsmanship, there's status and prestige, there's functionality on the watch, there's an emotional connection. Those are all different things you can be collecting. Because if you don't answer that question, you will end up with a collection that is unbelievably impressive, but you feel so disconnected from it. And I'm going to give you a concrete example here. So take something like my Rolex Sky-Dweller. I love it so much. The watch itself represents travel, complexity, engineering. Now, let's compare that to another watch in my collection, the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Perpetual Enamel. It's refinement. It's restrained. There's an appreciation of traditional watchmaking here. And then let's compare it to something like the Omega Seamaster Ploprof Summer Blue, another one of my watches. It is pure function. It's overbuilt. I get comments all the time about people saying, what in the world is that? I would never wear it. It is unapologetically a tool for professional divers, of which I am definitely not one. That is pure function. Pure function. Those are three completely different identities between those three watches. And when a collection works, it's not just because there's variety in it. It's because that variety still aligns with who you are as a person, as a collector, and as a human being. So satisfaction really comes from coherence. Another word I use for this would be integration. It's not just diversity. Now let's talk about something next that sounds productive, but it often does lead to frustration. And the term for this in the watch industry is optimization. This is where you'll see collectors start to ask, what's the perfect 3-watch collection? What's the best 1-watch collection? What covers every scenario? The gotta, the go anywhere, do anything watch. And on paper, I gotta be honest, this does make a lot of sense. But in reality, it actually turns into a collecting problem that needs to be solved, instead of something that should be experienced, which is really part of the ownership of having a watch. Because the more you optimize your collection, if you will, the more you start to notice what's missing from your collection. And this leads to a whole lot of decision fatigue, because you have too many options. There's almost too many perfect choices. And ironically, the more complete your collection becomes, the harder it gets to enjoy it. Because now you see it over here and you say, I have this great, grand, perfect collection with a complication covering every scenario, a use case for every watch, and it's hard to enjoy that collection because you don't know what to actually do now that you have this great and wonderful collection. So here's the shift that you need to make, and the sooner you make this, the more satisfied you will be with your collection. Stop trying to solve your collection. Stop trying to solve it. You have to start trying to understand your collection. And with that, is definitely going to come understanding yourself here. Now, this last piece is probably the most important point in the entire episode, because there is a massive difference between owning watches and experiencing them. I mentioned this before, but owning watches and experiencing watches are two very different things. A watch that sits in a box, even if it's from Patek Philippe, even if it's super rare, does not contribute to your satisfaction one bit. Again, it's going to be that one watch that I've got sitting over there, wherever there is. Could be in an actual safe, in a proverbial safe, in a safety deposit box, wherever it is. But it does not contribute to your satisfaction at all. Here are the things that matters when it comes to ownership. What matters is how often you wear it, what you associate it with, both from an emotional or a environmental standpoint, and how it fits into your daily life. Because over time, the watches you reach for repeatedly, those become your collection. Everything else is just inventory. I mean, you may as well not even own it at that point. So now, let's make this actionable. Because if you want to build a collection that you're actually satisfied with, you need to ask yourself 4 questions. These are all going to relate to this. The first question is, what role does this watch play in my collection? What role does it play? Is it the understated dress piece? Is it the bold statement piece? Is it my travel watch? Like, what role does it actually play? If it doesn't have a role in your collection, it is a waste of a piece. It's a waste of a watch. Might as well just get rid of it, move it, trade it for something that will play a role, because that is the important thing. Now, second question. When was the last time that I actually wore this watch? If you can't look at your collection and remember the last time you wore it within some reasonable framework of what that looks like for you, again, I believe that is a waste of a good watch. So you just got to think about that. Treat it like the old clothes that you have in your closet. If you can't remember the last time you wore it, get rid of it. Move it, trade it. Not necessarily saying take it to Goodwill and donate it. Watches have a lot of value here, but do something else. Get something else. So that's second question, is when was the last time you wore it? Third question, would I buy this again today? I don't know. Would you buy this again today? I look at my collection, and I can genuinely say every single one of these watches, for different reasons, I would buy them all again today. Now, do I think that that's the ultimate and final form that my collection might take? Probably not. Because, of course, I have ideas. I have thoughts. I have kind of different maps that I look at when I'm thinking about my collection. But there's not a single piece in here that is superfluous. And that is the part that I think really matters when you look at your collection. And then lastly is, does this reflect who I am right now? Today, with me in my current state of being in life, does it reflect who I am? Is it something that I have an association with that matters to me? And I do think if a watch does not answer those questions clearly when you look at it, it might not belong in your collection anymore. It just might be time to move on. So that's my reflection for you to make this very pragmatic and down to earth. So at the end of the day here, when we're talking about this topic, a satisfied collector is definitely not the person with the most watches in the room. They may be. Now they may be, because they may have thought through it and they're intentional, which is everything we're talking about. But it's more so, and more typically, I should say, the one who understands exactly why they have the watches that they have. And once you reach that point, once you understand exactly why you have the watches that you have, you stop chasing the next watch. And you start appreciating the one that's on your wrist already way, way, way more. So that was fun and games and we talked about a little psychology there. So now what I want to do is make this a little personal from me, because if I'm sharing the story of my own collection a little bit, that makes it more interesting. So that's what we're going to do for a little bit here. And I have 6 watches in my collection. I've heard people talk about this, and many times people say I'm not going to share how many watches I have for various reasons. I'm not going to share which watches I have for various reasons. And I'm not saying that any of those are bad reasons. I understand, as I've heard people explain them, I do understand why people don't share what's in their collection or how many or any of those things. But I do think this channel is about watch collecting. And I just sat here and I talked about these different principles as it applies to a collection. And I think it's important to talk about my collection. So, Rolex Sky-Dweller. That was my first watch. And I'll be straight with you on this, right? I have no illusions about, at this point, I was turning 30 that year. I knew I already had liked nice watches for a long time. I've talked about before about Movado that I had. I had several Movado prior. Fossil was my very first watch. Then when I was in my early 20s, I had a couple Movados. Probably in my mid-20s, late 20s, I got a nicer Movado, and I ended up getting rid of the other 3. And it just kind of evolved for me. And what I was always going after with watches was there was a combination of factors. There was a level of distinction, uniqueness, significance in some way, because for me, that was a way to have a little bit of a symbol, right, for myself. And at that time, I think also for other people, right? It was like I have this nice, piece of jewelry really at that point. It wasn't really mechanical watchmaking per se, but it was a nice watch. And there was a little bit of status associated with that. There was some prestige associated with that. That's where, for me, the tie to brand kind of, I wouldn't say started, but that was a external representation of that I had always had that. I mean, and you can see, like, if you've watched some of my podcasts, you can see, like, I'm an Oakley guy. I love Nike. There's just different brands that I associate with different things. And the watch aspects of my journey was definitely an expression of that. That's why I pretty much stuck with Movado for my entire watch collecting journey up until I bought my first Rolex when I turned 30. So that was the journey to the Sky-Dweller. And again, originally, I liked the Daytona quite a bit. I did like the Daytona. I had seen it. I thought it was attractive. It was the first watch that got me to think to myself, I can understand why someone would want to own that watch because it's very attractive. Rose gold, chocolate dial, Arabic numeral, Daytona, 116515, I don't know, I think, LN. And I remember trying it on, so I remember doing that. Again, experiencing the watch was a big deal. And at that time, I knew nothing about Rolex ADs, wait lists, any of that stuff. I had only been used to Movado, where you could go into a boutique and you could get a Movado. And so when I got to the Sky-Dweller, I called my local authorized dealer and basically asked them, hey, I'm interested in this watch, blue Rolex Sky-Dweller. How much is it? And that's kind of how the conversation started. And they basically said, hey, we haven't seen one of those in like 9 months. And I was like, okay, so, I mean, cool, but like I want one, so how does that work? And they said, well, usually when we don't see a watch in that period of time, it means they're getting ready to discontinue the watch. And I said, oh, really? Okay, well, I mean, so there's no chance of like getting one or putting my name down for one or any of that? And he was like, no, not really. So that was like open and shut case for me with that. So then immediately I went to secondary market. The only source that I knew at that time was Watchbox, which is now the 1916 company. And the reason was I had been watching videos for literally probably about 5 years. I mean, I had been watching tons and tons of videos, just learning different models, different brands, getting some ideas of what I liked, what I wouldn't like, all those sorts of things. And that's the only relationship that I had. I didn't know any of the people, of course, but in my world, I had a relationship with these people. They had been making videos and providing content. I had been watching and learning, and it was exciting for me. So I sent him a message, I think, basically saying, hey, I'm willing to pay this much for this watch. So I still was like trying to underbid what they had the watch listed for. I remember that. And they kind of reached out, and Armand, who is at 1916, Armand, if you're out there, appreciate you, buddy. Reached out and just said, hey, there's not a whole lot of room to move with Rolex. Like, we have a pretty firm price on these because this is the market price, and that's just what it is. And so I said, you know what? Sounds good to me. Let's do it. And I had probably worked 4 to 5 years to save towards that watch, and it was a stretch still, but I've talked about before, going back to the psychological aspects of it, we talked about resetting your norm today. And I think you can also do that in other areas of life, and financially was one of them. One of my goals in buying this watch was to normalize having luxurious things around in my life. Because I didn't have them up to that point. I mean, again, the watches that I had were luxurious to an extent, but nothing like this, right? And so that was one of the real goals, was how do I make luxury normal for myself as an inspiration to me, not to really anybody else, but it was just, how do I inspire myself to say, if I can accomplish this financial goal that I've set for myself, then I can accomplish so many other things. And that was the real story of me getting into my first Rolex watch. And of course, I did all the research, right? I researched the specs and the complications and all those things. I was close to getting a Datejust 41, but that wasn't what I was buying. I was buying something that was unique, maybe a little bit rare, more complicated, more technically expert. I mean, there were just so many factors that I've talked about today that all went into buying that next watch. And that very, not quickly, I shouldn't say that. I was very convinced that that would be my only watch, because I had one for the next 2.5 years. And that was it. And at some point, I started looking at, okay, well, what if I actually could get a Daytona? Would I want to do that? Would I make that like kind of my two watches, my sport and my dress? And I remember, again, doing a lot of research and just understanding, like, the Daytona is not all that. Yes, it's an icon, but it's not all that. It just has a chronograph in it, okay, and it's made by Rolex. And just those two factors alone make it basically unobtainium at that point when I was trying to see if it was possible to get. So instead I went the alternative route, and I don't even want to call it an alternative exactly. I mean, it is, but I think the more interesting route, which was the Yachtmaster 2 at that time, 2017 redesign, with the Mercedes-style hands, updated movement, and I think it's 4161, or maybe that's the Daytona movement, I don't remember. But it was interesting, and it was different. And it went with the Sky-Dweller in a way. I still have a video that I did a long time ago all about the ring command bezel, because I loved the fact that my Sky-Dweller and now the Yachtmaster 2 both had the ring command bezel on them. And so I remember getting that watch and feeling very, very complete at that point. And in a very similar way to what I've talked about in the podcast today, it just was immediately like, okay, there's got to be something else. Now it's got to be 3. Grew up a little religious, so 3. It was a very, very important, sacred number, right? So so picture this. I have a 42 millimeter Sky-Dweller. I have a 44 millimeter Yachtmaster 2, even though the lug-to-lug is about the same. I mean, it's a big watch. They're both big watches. So then I went and bought a Omega 38 millimeter Aquaterra Seamaster. Now, that was my first mistake, was looking at a 38. Because I thought to myself, okay, something a little bit easier, it's going to stay out of the way. I actually bought it. It's going to sound ridiculous, but I actually wanted to buy this watch to wear to the gym. So, figure that one out. I had these 2 amazing watches, and then I was like, well, I need a gym watch. That was actually my reasoning at that point. So, again, going back to what I talked about in the episode here, both the Sky-Dweller and the Yachtmaster 2 were cut from the same cloth in terms of very out of the box. I mean, from my perspective, right? Then getting into the industry and kind of seeing where these things fall, maybe not as much, but still within the Rolex catalog, I would say, yeah, the Sky-Dweller is a little obscure. The Yachtmaster 2, very, very obscure. Like, not a lot of people liked it. People called it the Clown Master, all sorts of weird things that I'm like, I don't care. And so then I was like, I need a gym watch. I want this Omega. I liked Omega, so it was kind of just like a natural progression of building significance. I'm building a modern watch into my collection, modern design. I like the design elements, water resistance, all those things, durability. So again, that is like the theme that continues to be central to my collection today. I don't have either of those watches anymore. I only have the Sky-Dweller. There were some trades and moves in there that needed to happen for me to get to where I am today. But I'm much more pleased with my collection today than I ever have been. And I do miss my Yachtmaster too, I will say. Of any watch that I traded, because I did trade it to get my JLC that I mentioned, I do miss it. But I'm also very satisfied with it, and I have a different watch that plays that part now, which is my Omega Ploprof, Summer Blue, Seamaster Professional 1200 meter diver. Because it was very much, it came down to function. That was the other piece that the Yachtmaster 2 had, was 10-minute countdown timer. Very innovative, very interesting, very useful around the house, very useful in the kitchen with whatever you were doing. So now having the timing bezel on the Ploprof is fantastic, and it works for exactly the same purpose, really, that I was using the Yachtmaster 2 for before. So next we had the Dan Reuter DR02. I've shared the story before. Was going through cancer. This was a group watch introduced for the Talking Time with Tim Masso Facebook group. I was a part of the group, still am a part of the group, shout out to Tim, and was able to get one of these. And initially, I put in a request. Dan said, all right, I'm good to go. And then I said, actually, hold on, because I literally just got diagnosed with cancer and have to go through all these medical treatments, so we're going to have to put a hold on that. Dan was very understanding. We put a hold on it. And then probably about 8 months later, when that mess was all figured out, and I actually ended up having a really good financial finish to the year, and the expenses ended up being less than I thought, all those sorts of, everything just kind of worked out. And then I was like, let's do this. Let's get this Dan Reuter, because it's very, very cool. And it still is one of the most interesting pieces in my collection because there's such a story around it. I don't have that epic of a story around every one of my watches, but that one I do. And so for that reason, it is very special to me, and it's important. And it has all the same design elements. And that was really when the blue theme started to come to life in my day-to-day. So there's that watch. Then I had acquired a couple others. I had acquired a Grand Seiko Night Birch, which I loved. I had acquired a Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Moon in black, which I loved. You can see the reviews of them both on the channel. And then somewhere along the way, SIH 2019 rolled around in here. And obviously this was a couple years after that, but I discovered that, actually. I had discovered the launches that happened that year, particularly from Jaeger-LeCoultre, and I found what I believe to be basically my grail watch at that point, which was the JLC Master Ultra Thin Moon, but the 2019 SIH release with the guilloche and enamel dial and a moon phase. It was the exact same watch that I had, but it just had this crazy, awesome radial guilloche with enamel laid over the top. And so that was kind of my grail watch for a while. And then because of the fact that I had no idea where to go to get those sorts of things, once again, I was working with Watchbox in 1916, and they were able to find a Perpetual calendar version of it. And I kind of was debating because I was like, okay, I really want the moon phase, but this is one of those types of watches that you don't really run into very often. You're talking about 100 pieces. That's all they made. It was 100 moon phase, 100 Perpetual calendar, 50 tourbillon of the same design style. And so to me, it just seemed right to go for it. And so traded in several, sold several, and that was what I got. So I had this 3-watch collection, Sky-Dweller, JLC, Reuter, just a really cool trio of kick-ass pieces. And then I knew, having gotten rid of my Night Birch, I knew that I wanted Grand Seiko in the collection. Again, Grand Seiko to me, of just what it represented. And it represents so much, from not only just value, but also there was so much story behind the brand and how they come up with their dials and designs and all those types of things, that I knew I wanted Grand Seiko back in the collection. But now I was coming from a different place. I had committed to the blue dial theme. I had committed to kind of the Evolution 9 style case because I loved it in the Night Birch. And so that's where I found the SLGA017, Skyflake dial, Evolution 9 case, backside power reserve. It's just phenomenal. And basically I think of it as like an evolved Skyflake. So that's a little bit about how that happened. And then I'm trying to think. Girard-Perregaux was the next one that came because I had started to really like and get into GP, and I'm continuing to go down the rabbit hole with GP because I think they're fantastic. They don't get enough recognition, personally. But all I had seen was the Laureato, and I already had my integrated steel sports watch. I had that with my Sky-Dweller. So when I saw the Laureato, and that was what I associated with GP, I wasn't really that intrigued. It wasn't until I ran across the 1966 collection, which is their dress watch collection, that I said to myself, okay, this is epic and no one talks about these, so let's get into that. So, and very shortly, it didn't take me a long time, because I was already kind of ready for whatever that next piece was going to be, and as I explored out, the aventurine was something I didn't have in my collection, and I really liked it. I had seen it on several watches and kind of always wanted one. So that was how I ended up with my GP. And then lastly was the Omega. Again, I've had 3 different Aquaterra models, I think, at this point, and each one has had a different role, kind of had a different character to it. I've really liked all of them, but they always just got kind of overshadowed by my Sky-Dweller because they were so similar. And so I needed something that basically took the place of my Yachtmaster 2, which was different complication, different construction, different build. And in this case, I wanted an Omega because I needed it to be more of that, okay, I swim with this, I take this on vacation. It's I don't care what complications it has in the sense of like, it doesn't have to have a date, doesn't have to have any of those things. I just want to be able to time with it. And that was why the Ploprof came into the collection at its most recent, which was, late last year at this point. So that's my collection. That's the story of my collection. And so you can see, as I talk through that, and you look back at some of the things we talked about here, what you're actually collecting. Why does it matter? What are you collecting? And having that illusion of one more watch that you always need, it's a never-ending game. And I think it's important that you're conscious about that choice. Because even still for me, having gone through all the things that I've gone through and understanding these things now, it's not that I don't want watches. There are still pieces that I have on a short list and, things that I'm kind of like, all right, here's about when I would probably acquire this. But I understand all of the reasons and the decisions behind it, and that's what makes it work. Like, that's what makes it okay. And I've also gotten a lot better at not letting the financial piece of this get in the way of my forward progress, because I think for a long time it was a little bit of a trade-off. It was either I could go more watches or I could go more, investing in all those things. And so now I've found a much better, healthier balance, just better relationship with watch collecting in general. And so those are not at odds anymore. They one leads to the other, and that's a very healthy thing and healthy place to get to. So that is my wish for you, is that you get to that place in all those elements that we talked about today. What role does the watch play in my collection? When was the last time I wore it? In my case, I wear all my watches every week. I just do. My Reuter is the only thing I wear every day. I've talked about that. It's the only watch in my collection that gets wear every single day. So Dan, if you're out there, cheers, buddy. I appreciate you. Would I buy them again today? I already shared that. I would 100% buy them all today. Will my collection evolve? Yes, and I already know that, but I would absolutely buy every one of them again today. And does it reflect who I am right now? 1,000%. If you don't know me, because we haven't really talked and I've debated doing lives and things like that, but I am a very structured person. It's just who I am. And the fact that I have basically a weekly routine, if you will, around when I wear my watches, for the most part, some weeks I need a little variety, so I switch 2 days. But for the most part, Monday I wear Jaeger-LeCoultre. Tuesday I wear Girard-Perregaux. Wednesday I wear my Grand Seiko. Thursday, Friday, I kind of mix it up. It can usually go either Rolex or Omega, one of the two. And then the other day will be the other one. And then the weekends are just kind of a little bit of a free-for-all depending on what I have going on. But I do rotate through. And I very much believe that I know, again, what I have on my list of things to come. One from Vacheron Constantin, which has been another brand that I've wanted to have in the collection for a long time. And then I actually have a inexpensive luxury watch on my list right now, and I'm not going to mention it yet because I may or may not actually do it, but it's been something that I've been pondering and thinking about a little bit. So, you may see, I mean, you'll see if I get them because I always do reviews of them. But realistically, it's like I would have a watch for every day of the week, and then probably my Reuter that I would wear every day. Because again, that now has become my gym watch, workout watch, do things around the house watch, just kind of that durable, everyday, go anywhere, do anything watch. And so that's what I see for my collection. I don't have a vision for it beyond that, but I do think that having these things in your mind as you're collecting, asking these questions, and again, my goal for the channel is for you to get out of watch collecting whatever you want because I want you to know and love your pieces. I don't want to hype it up. That's not the goal of this channel. It's not about hyping it up. It's about allowing you to understand these things more and better about yourself. So thank you for being here. I appreciate you for stopping by, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.